We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We continue to be joined by Liberty Nation's senior principal analyst and long-time host of this here radio show, Tim Donner. Now, Tim, I think we've really run the whole gauntlet on this. We've talked about the pre-inauguration period. We've talked the first day and the first 100 days of Donald Trump in office. We've talked the Democrat resistance and how that, I think we both agree, has failed to form and can't really form until somebody steps into a leadership role there. But now what I'd like to talk about is the potential wilderness years that Democrats are facing. Because we talk a lot about what's happening with the Democratic Party right now, but I suspect, and please tell me your thoughts on this, I suspect that the Democratic Party might be out of power for at least 8 years, if not 12, because they don't have, as far as I can tell, they don't have an ideology behind them or a driving force or a raison d'etre to really grip onto.
Well, I think we see it as we look back over presidential history that every election is essentially a reaction to the last presidency. For example, Woodrow Wilson, let's just go back to the start of the 20th century. Woodrow Wilson, at the end of 8 years, was out of gas, and the country was not pleased that he forced us into World War I. We could argue whether that was a move he had to make or not, but the response to that was 12 years of Republican presidents. When the Depression hit, Franklin Delano Roosevelt reversed that Republican string of victories and won 4 straight himself, and then Harry Truman made it 5. As a response to the Great Depression, people did not trust Republicans anymore. And, likewise, at the end of 12 years of Reagan and Bush, people were just kind of exhausted of the conservatism that had been strong during the Reagan administration. And then George H.W. Bush came in and called for a kinder, gentler nation, which meant that he was going to put the brakes on the hardcore conservatism of Ronald Reagan. Likewise, this election was a reaction to 12 of the last 16 years of progressive Democratic rule. And most times when a philosophy such as progressivism has been discredited or even disgraced, it takes more than one election for that party to recover, which means I'd be surprised if the Democrats were able to win in 2028 unless they're able to completely renounce the philosophy that has basically animated the 12 years of the Obama and Biden presidencies. So I agree with you. They could spend a lot of time in the wilderness, but a note of caution is that, in 1972, the Democrats had gone so far left, George McGovern lost 49 states to Richard Nixon, but they were able to turn back, and we've discussed this before, by going to the center with Jimmy Carter, who won 4 years later. Same thing with Bill Clinton, who came to the rescue of the Democratic Party after the disaster of left-wing Michael Dukakis's candidacy in 1988. So it is possible, but the Democrats are somebody said that the Democrats have to throw progressives under the bus. But the problem is that the progressives are the bus. And so it's going to take a long time to turn this Titanic ship around. And they have to hope that they have to invest in someone like Pennsylvania's more moderate Governor Josh Shapiro, and put all their chips in behind him or another moderate like Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky if they want to be competitive in 2028. And let's not forget that Donald Trump is going to anger an awful lot of people in the years ahead. He intends to, because he truly wants to empty the swamp and destroy the administrative state to the extent that he can. So he's going to create even more enemies. And you just don't know come 2028 whether people will be exhausted of drastic reforms. That combined with a moderate candidate like a Josh Shapiro could give Democrats a chance in 2028. But if they insist on saying it's not progressivism that cost them this election, or that, handed a victory to Donald Trump when no one thought he could make a comeback after January 6th and the end of his administration, then they're headed for a long run, 40 days on the backside of the desert, so to speak.
Yes, I think
40 years on the
40
backside
years,
of the desert. Yes.
I think that's probably the right analysis on this, that they need to shift to somebody who is a more moderate, like a Bill Clinton type, for example.
Yes.
But regards to the lessons that they've learned, if will they jettison progressivism, all of the noise we're hearing now and still hearing, except from a very few quiet corners, is that Kamala Harris lost because A, she only had 100 days. B, she's black. C, she's a woman. Those are the three main
Or
excuses we're hearing.
even D, that she was just a bad candidate and it's not representative of the party as a whole.
That is the least one that we're hearing, is that she was a bad candidate, although it does pop up. But nobody's saying, very few people in a position to shape policy or the future direction of the Democratic Party are saying it's because of this ideology that has infected one of America's two great parties. Nobody seems to be willing to say that. And I think until they do, people like Andy Beshear, people like Josh Shapiro are going to be out in the wilderness because they're not
people
going to get
like
the
Joy
support.
Reid, people like Joy Reid and the ladies of The View, and people like Senator Claire McCaskill, former senator, who's a prominent commentator on CNN. What they've done is they've turned from calling Trump supporters garbage and deplorable and irredeemable to basically attacking the American people writ large, to say, I didn't think we lived in a country with so many people. Obviously, Donald Trump understands the country more than we do. We didn't believe that the country as a whole was so misogynistic and racist. And you had Al Sharpton attacking black men for being misogynist. Whoever thought that we'd see that day?
Yeah, it's I mean, I'm wondering if Al Sharpton is this was Al Sharpton's last big hurrah. I mean, he's out of favor now, even with his friends over at MSNBC, for accepting was it $500,000 donation to his foundation before interviewing Kamala. So I think this might be the last election that we have a powerful voice from the Reverend Al Sharpton. And as far as I'm concerned, Tim, that's quite a good thing.
Well, I mean, it's if you think about it, given its race hustling and all the devastation that he's left in his wake over the years, with his anti-Semitic diatribes and all the stuff, that the false accusations, Tawana Brawley and the rest, it's hard to believe that that guy still has any credibility. But he's a prominent voice on MSNBC, and it's every time that I'm forced to watch MSNBC for professional purposes and they go to Al Sharpton, I just laugh. I'm like, really? Who in this country is left believing that Al Sharpton is a legitimate voice for anybody or anything?
And on that note, Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Great pleasure, Mark, as always.
And that's all we have time for on today's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest, Tim Donner, and extend the very merriest of Christmases and Happy New Year's to you, the listeners at home, for joining us. And remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse campaigns, candidates, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.